there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Halfway Through the Heat podcast. This is episode 5, and today we're going to be talking about various wrestling news, an underrated, overrated segment, a new segment we're going to be calling Sizzling Hot Take, which is, well, controversial, and another section of official rankings. And, of course, something positive about Raw. So, I'm here. I'm Joe. I'm here with my co-host, Tom. Tom, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm enjoying a staycation from work. That's a jolly portmanteau of stay and vacation because I'm broke.
All right. That's a true heart of a wrestling fan. Broke.
That's right. I'm a lowlife, like many wrestling fans.
All right. I guess I'd throw myself in that category as well. So it's perfect. I'm not on a staycation though. I'm just off today because it's my normal day off. I'm underemployed.
Together, we are your authorities, your trans-Pacific authorities on professional wrestling. And we're going to start, as we start every week, because the internet wrestling fan world is full of negativity and harsh opinions, and we want to bring a little sunshine into people's lives. We want to accentuate the positive, and that's why every week we say something positive about Raw.
So, what do you have going on for Raw this week? How did you feel? What was positive for you?
This it was actually a real challenge to find something positive to say about Raw this week. This was one of the worst Raws I can remember. I think they just did a lot of stuff wrong and a lot of I don't really know
whoa there, Tom.
You're right.
This is something positive about Raw.
Okay. Okay, so here we go. Positive about Raw. Ryback versus Mark Henry didn't last 10 minutes.
Okay.
It was short. That is the positive thing about Raw. That was the most positive thing about Raw.
Okay, makes sense. My most positive thing about Raw was easier to find for me at least. And it was when Paul Heyman was doing his thing in the beginning. He had a little section of rhyming, and I thought that was good. So he had we had some Paul Heyman freeform poetry going on there, and I can always appreciate that. But yeah, it was a bit hard to think of something that was really positive. Oh, oh, Raw.
Yeah. No, you're right. Okay, so Paul Heyman rhyming, and the fact that Ryback Mark Henry didn't take up too much of my life. Two positive things about Raw.
Yeah. Let's know what we should talk about though briefly. The Ring of Honor pay-per-view.
Yes, we should, because it was sensational.
That was really good. That was not something I have to work hard to say something positive about.
No, I did not have to struggle. In case you missed it, we won't spoil too much of it, but we will spoil a little bit of it. You probably read it by now, but Jay Lethal is now the unified champion of Ring of Honor, winning the World Heavyweight Championship from Jay Briscoe. Adding to his World Television title was a fantastic match. I think that's the right move. I think it makes more sense to have the guy who's on the rise win that match and then become like the hated heel champion that everyone else is chasing. It was also Samoa Joe's final night in Ring of Honor, and he got a nice send-off because he's going to NXT, and who knows from there. But the whole thing, from start to finish, I thought was a really strong pay-per-view, and I really hope Ring of Honor, now that they're on Destination America in the United States, I hope they're getting some more attention because it's really, in terms of wrestling in the Western Hemisphere, I think they're the best one right now. I think I'd put them above everybody else.
I would definitely agree with that. Watching Ring of Honor is always exciting because you know there's going to be good wrestling matches going on. Not like it's not going to be 20 minutes of promos. It's going to be like 1 minute of promo maybe, and then like an awesome match. That's
Right.
10 minutes itself, at least. I don't know. I think Ring of Honor does wrestling for fans of actual wrestling, if that makes any sense.
It does. I think the big question for them is to figure out whether or not they can bring that across to a new audience, right? Because like the wrestling hardcore already watches Ring of Honor, and so in order for them to get to the next level, they're going to have to find people who are not necessarily right now big wrestling fans. I'd love to see them be able to do that. I just don't know. I think it's really more of a matter of marketing than changing the product, but I don't know how they're going to do that. Frankly, no one has ever done that outside of like the times when WWF was huge in the '80s and then the Monday Night Wars. Nobody's really appealed to casual fans.
Yeah. I WCW and the WWE have done it.
Right,
But
but kind of sporadically.
yeah, not consistently, but
And I think a lot of times it was sort of the they were both very savvy about new technology, like in the '80s, getting on cable television. Um, I don't know. I think you could get a sophisticated audience, a prestige audience, to watch Ring of Honor. The kind of people who enjoy like um, Walking Dead shows like that. I think you can get a kind of a smart, urban, affluent audience to like it because it is so distinctive and so different. It's just a matter of reaching those people and showing them that it's not this kind of cartoonish steroid opera that I think a lot of people associate with pro wrestling.
yeah, I think that's a good point. I just don't think I think wrestling itself is the the kind of thing that's tainted to those people.
Hmm.
It's like not the kind of thing that like they're willing to give a shot to because of the kind of connotation of wrestling and wrestling fans and whatever else. There is a lot kind of added to that, you know, I mean, it'll fall into a topic we're going to cover later, but there are some kind of negative stereotypes for wrestling fans, and some of them are the stereotypes are not untrue.
No.
I mean, it's not exactly like those are coming out of nowhere, but there are a lot of them, and they are kind of things that you would associate with people you don't want to be associated with, and I mean, we mentioned some at the beginning. Um, it's not really a thing like that the people who are watching like Major League Soccer are going to be all of a sudden watching Ring of Honor. It's a totally different demographic, and I think it would be a really hard sell, even though it's definitely not the same thing as other more like TNA or WWE or something with the kind of steroid opera.
Yeah. I agree, but at the same time, like this will shock listeners, but Joe and I were very much into comic books in the early 1990s when we were younger. And if you remember back then, like no one who was well adjusted went inside a comic book shop. I mean, like the reason that the comic book store guy character on The Simpsons was so resonant is because that was every comic book store owner, and like I mean, everybody who went in a comic book store was like this. Every stereotype was correct, but
It's really true. Like, the guy that ran our local comic book store was actually that guy. He looked like him and everything. It was really creepy. He had the
I believe
ponytail and the beard, and
I think he actually cut his hair in anger because he was tired of being compared to the character from The Simpsons.
yes,
But the point is, today comic books are completely mainstream, and you have like really upscale comic book boutiques in New York City that don't just sell like the sort of graphic novel, but I mean also Marvel and DC, and that it's become completely mainstream to be into comic books, obviously because of the success of comic book movies. But that kind of stigma has completely evaporated, even though, to be sure, there are still a lot of socially maladjusted people who are into comic books. I think something like that's popular with wrestling. I just don't know how it comes about. I mean, I think it could be done. Um, and I think it sort of needs to be done for the health of the business, but I'm not really sure. I'm not, I'm no genius, so I wouldn't know. But um, you start to see things like the Mountain Goats releasing a wrestling themed album, and there were a couple of other things I was noticing about sort of the kind of hip interest in wrestling um, that could take off, and I think Ring of Honor is sort of best positioned to do that because it's so like serious. It doesn't have a lot of the kind of like um, problematic, as they say on Tumblr, political stereotypes and things that you have in WWE. Um, it has this kind of like semi underground feel to it that I think appeals to people. Um, I think it could work. It's just a matter of trying to break out of the like hardcore wrestling fan demographic, which is going to watch Ring of Honor no matter what.
Yeah, well, I mean, the difference I think between like comic books and wrestling is that the stereotypes for those two demographics are really different. I mean, it's not like I mean, even in the worst kind of thing where you had to hide that you read comic books, it wasn't you weren't really hiding it because people would think you were poor white trash or whatever. It was more like you were hiding it because people would think you're a nerd, and like the the kind of connotations with that is pretty different. Like being a nerd has become like the trendy popular thing. Like people will always try to drop their nerd credit or whatever.
Right.
But you don't ever see anybody dropping their poor credit. Like you know
Yeah, it's true. I
I
mean, I was at a on Saturday. I went to see an indie show, Pioneer Valley Pro Wrestling. I'm sorry, in Hadley, Massachusetts, at an American Legion Hall, and it was great. And I took two friends who had never been to a wrestling show before, had never even watched wrestling on TV, not even in the rock and wrestling era, because I convinced them that anyone can have fun at live wrestling, and they did. They had fun, but they were sort of. I mean, they live in Northampton, which is very like trendy um, college town, and one of them remarked at one point of the audience, the audience at the wrestling show was, "Who let Kentucky in here?"
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that unless you're at Chikara, I guess, and then you're
And
who
it's a comic book audience, basically.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it was. I mean, it was working class people from around the valley. It was a big crowd, about 160 people at an American Legion Hall, and it was a good show. Good action. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a sort of a class aspect to wrestling fandom that could be a big hurdle for some middle class people because there's nothing the middle class fears more than slipping down into the working class. And I'm not sure many of them relish the opportunity to rub shoulders with the great unwashed.
Yeah, it's a different kind of gap there between comic books have always been that kind of nerd thing, whereas like I guess that had the possibility of becoming popular for whatever reason. But man, I honestly, I mean, like you, I don't see any way that people are gonna make it popular. But I guess it is. I mean, I just don't. Man, I have no ideas for what people should do to do that. I mean, really though. I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm a wrestling fan. I don't care if it has a negative connotation that way. I just think like it's not gonna be something that becomes incredibly mainstream on like the back of what it is now, and the idea of it at least.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't care. I like it. I mean, I like the fact that it has kind of this outlaw um, air to it, or this sort of like disrespectful or unrespectable connotation. I mean, I go to punk rock shows. I've been a punk rocker for too many years, and I like that. But at the same time, I sort of do worry about its future, just because you can still have a giant successful show like Raw, and you still have trouble getting TV contracts just because your audience consists of poor people. Um, uh, well, that's interesting. Food for thought. I'm certain we'll come back to that. We should get on to news. There's not much news this week. It's been kind of quiet in the world of wrestling. Um, it's like the hot stove season, I guess, the equivalent. But one thing that's sort of interesting is there's a lot of speculation that Dolph Ziggler, who is one of the internet favorites in WWE, is so unhappy with his situation there that when his contract expires in a couple of months, the rumor is that he may be heading for TNA. Uh,
TNA.
this was posted on Twitter by someone who initially was identified as a former TNA writer. That seems to have been retracted on some wrestling sites now. It's not clear where this came from. Um, Ziggler hasn't said anything publicly about it right now, but that's an interesting rumor because I think what's interesting about it, I don't think he's going to TNA, but he's sort of like the cause celeb of a lot of people on the internet who think he's being misused, and that WWE is not treating him the way they should, and that he's kind of complained a little bit on his Twitter about not getting the right push. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think Dolph Ziggler is used the wrong way, or do you think this is basically all they're going to get out of Dolph Ziggler?
I'm a little on both sides there because he obviously has something that people like about him. I'm not a Dolph Ziggler fan, but he does get a good reaction from the crowd, and he does have that kind of, when they they fake you out and push him for like a week, like you'll get like 2 weeks of a push and then like 2 months of continual losses. But but it seemed like they were really going to do something with him. Remember, was it Survivor Series where he beat like four people in that, yeah, in that match in the four
Yep.
man tag,
Hmm.
like coming back from one to to win? Like, if there was ever a chance for them to push him as like something like a legitimate draw for people, it was then. And they just what happened there? It's just like the next day he was back to losing on Raw.
Yeah.
It's really strange. So I mean, I can kind of understand why people would say, like he hasn't been used correctly, because like they seem to set him up to be pushed like to the moon, and then like he just kind of, what they actually have done is set up a step ladder with an illusionary reach to the moon, and he just gets to a certain point and tries to grab it and just falls through and dies. It's the kind of thing where like all the time, and like he's just stuck now in this kind of goofball thing now. It's just not really working.
Ziggler's interesting to me because he's so popular with internet fans, but he didn't come up through the indies. He came up straight through WWE, and I think he's like the only guy that's true of who's beloved by like the insider fans. Normally, they pick an indie favorite and they love that person and then complain how they're being misused. But Ziggler has really won them over, which is interesting. And I think he's a good wrestler. I think he's good on the mic. I just something doesn't click with me. I'm not like you. I'm in the same position where I recognize he's popular, but I don't have that much of a attachment to him. And I kind of wonder, like, what would be a Dolph Ziggler push that worked? I mean, can you see him being world heavyweight champion?
No, I that's the thing. He doesn't. I mean, it's possibly that the way they book him makes it really bad. I mean, because he does seem like he loses all the time, so it's not really someone you think of as the champion. But maybe if they booked him correctly, I don't know. To me, he just seems like um, young Billy Gunn.
Yeah.
I don't really know what I mean. I was never a Billy Gunn fan. Um, it's that kind of thing where just okay, I guess people like him for whatever reason, but I don't know. I don't. It's a mystery to me, and I don't think like the way they've been using him, like he has no chance of being the champion.
No, but I don't think he. I mean, at his top dollar best, I think Dolph Ziggler would be a good Intercontinental Champion in the old days when the Intercontinental Championship was seen as the wrestler's championship, right? Um, he's a top mid card guy, but I just don't see him being a main event guy.
What about the U.S. champion?
That's right. Well, yes, he could be. Well, that is now the belt. That's the Intercontinental Championship is just mired in the middle of nothing. The U.S. Championship is, but the U.S. Championship has been elevated because they had a great feud with Cena and Rusev, and now a great feud with Cena and Owens, and that's how you build interest in a championship, right? You have two credible guys have a really good program over it.
I have always liked the U.S. Championship. They always used it really well in WCW as well. Like there was always a really whoever was the U.S. champion was always doing something awesome. And I think like you know that image of it kind of stays over for me in in WWE, even though like for a while it was just kind of like another intercontinental title. The U.S. champion in WCW, it was always like something awesome. Like whoever was the U.S. champion was going to be, someone who is going to be big next. You remember, actually, if you remember the Intercontinental Championship in the 80s, for example, like whoever was the Intercontinental Champion was always the person who was going to be the champion next. It was almost always that. So, like the Ultimate Warrior would come out and he would become the Intercontinental Champion. And then, like a year down the line, he's going to be the champion or like he's going to be fighting with the champion. And it was the same because remember Honky Tonk Man was the Intercontinental Champion. He was feuding with Hulk Hogan. And he didn't become the champion, obviously, but he was at that level even though he was the Intercontinental Champion. And now, like, if you look at the Intercontinental Championship, it's like the king of the low card.
Yeah, it really is. It's like the old European Championship. It's just like this leftover belt that they don't really put much thought into. Um, and nobody, I mean, I can't imagine anyone sitting around and speculating on who's going to be the next Intercontinental Champion. It just doesn't. There's no reason for it to exist right now.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't that much they can do with the Intercontinental Championship to make it seem strong, except like put it on somebody who is strong and then book them strong. Like, um, I'm not saying like the way they're doing it with Cena, but something like put it on somebody new. Put it on somebody new that's a monster, and just do the Goldberg thing. Just have them keep winning and winning and winning, and no matter what, like they can fight like top tier guys and they'll still win, and they just keep winning and winning, and they get like a long streak going with the Intercontinental type, and then you can just kind of pull the same thing that they're doing in Ring of Honor with like, I don't care what you think, but I've had this Intercontinental title, no one's beaten me, it's better than your title.
Yeah, yeah. And when you think about like the classic Intercontinental Champions, like Macho Man and Ricky Steamboat and Razor Ramon and people like that, they really made the belt because they were so credible and they were so good. Like they made the belt seem like that's the wrestler's belt. Like the world, title is about who is the most charismatic and who draws the most money. But like this belt is for the guy who is like the best in the ring, and they could do that again.
Yeah, it's just they don't. It's just a joke now. So they'd have to work to get it back, like because obviously whoever they put it on is still going to have that negative image kind of attached to them until they do something to make it less so.
Right. They could have gotten a good start at the Elimination Chamber, because they had the Elimination Chamber match to determine the IC champion, and instead they put it on, Ryback. And I know that they actually did. I mean, the plan was to put it on Daniel Bryan, and I think that would have been the right step. Like a guy who's definitely a main eventer instantly brings credibility to the belt, just like they put the U.S. title on John Cena. Of course, Daniel Bryan got hurt. Now they can't do that, but I don't know that Ryback is like Plan B. Like there had to have been someone else they could have given that to. I mean, Dolph Ziggler would have been fine with it.
Yeah, that Dolph Ziggler would have made sense at least. But I guess Ryback is kind of over in a inexplicable kind of way. I I don't understand the kind of excitement people have in the arenas, at least for Ryback.
I
But
don't either. And like they're putting him up against guys who it's almost impossible for him to have good matches against. Like Mark Henry and Ryback are like they can't. There's no way that's a good match. Ryback and Big Show. There's no way that's a good match.
it's the kind of thing that I think Vince McMahon likes those kinds of matches. It's just like
Yeah,
two big guys. Not no pun intended there.
yeah. It's amazing the Great Khali was let go because he could have some 5-star classics with Ryback right now.
3 star three-way dance.
Yeah, now you're talking triple threat match: Big Show, Ryback, Great Khali, Mark Henry, special guest referee.
I was surprised. I'm surprised that Mark Henry is still around.
I'm
Um,
surprised at like how much goodwill there is toward Mark Henry because I always thought he was really kind of dull, but people get excited when he comes out like it's a big event. And I mean, I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't either, but I because when he was the substitute in that recent pay-per-view match and for Rusev, and I was thinking like Mark Henry, has he been on TV at all? Like, did they just was he like is he local and they just called him up because they needed him? And like, no, he's actually still been wrestling. I just hadn't noticed. Um, yeah, Mark Henry. So
All right.
next news. What do we got here? Hulk Hogan.
Uh,
More Hulk Hogan
yeah,
news. I'm excited for this.
more Hulk Hogan news. In a Q&A with Fox Sports, Hulk Hogan said that there's a 50-50 chance he will be wrestling at WrestleMania 32 next year. He didn't give any details, but he seems to think it's a possibility. Now, WrestleMania 32 this year, it's interesting because it's in Texas. So there's all the speculation about Stone Cold coming back for a match. There's all the speculation that this will be The Undertaker's last match because, they're both from Texas. Um, and now Hulk Hogan kind of inserting himself into the mix here. So, first of all, what are the real odds of Hulk Hogan having a match at WrestleMania 32? And if it does happen, who would you want to see him have a match with?
Oh man. I think the odds are probably pretty low. Um, I I couldn't imagine them putting Hulk Hogan in an actual match. Um, unless it was like a they were like it's gonna be Hulk Hogan versus the Undertaker versus Stone Cold
Oh
in
my
it
God.
in an slow old man match.
Oh my God. Sting, special guest referee.
Yeah, yeah, they could add Sting into the mix. It could be four way, everybody leave town match.
A nursing home match.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I think the chances are very low. Also, if they do have a match, I would like to see it Hogan versus Nick Denton from Gawker Media.
yes,
That would be a good match. It's still, that's a match Hogan could still credibly win. So, I mean, I would like to see that. But in reality, I don't know. I think they'll probably have something for him to do because people love him so much. But I think it might be something, like where he comes out and just kind of fires the crowd up, and then that's it. Like I just don't see him having a match, and I don't know who could give him a decent match. I
yeah,
mean, we were talking about this earlier, and you mentioned Brock Lesnar. I mean, it would just be horrible. I mean, it would just be. But Hogan has said that he'd like to have a match with Lesnar. And he's also said he's a big fan of Kevin Owens, and I think either one of those guys. It's just like even if they were at their most gentle, they would like come close to actually crippling Hulk Hogan.
yeah. I think you would. I just was saying that as a joke that Hulk Hogan should have a squash match with Brock Lesnar and Hogan would be the squasher.
Yeah,
But like the uh the thing is that like an actual match with Hogan and Brock Lesnar is like man, one suplex from Brock Lesnar would probably literally kill Hulk Hogan. like
yeah,
I can't imagine him being able to take a suplex at his like not even just because he's old, but because he's old and so horribly broken.
yeah. He's really beaten up.
Yeah, and I mean I've heard people like talk about Hulk Hogan like how in his daily life he has trouble walking.
Right.
And like they'll say, like I've seen him walking around and he's old, like he has to hobble around, but like, send him down to the ring and he'll like be in horrible pain every step, but he'll make it look like he's fine. And I think like it's a kind of good work ethic, but it's not that alone isn't going to be enough to like make him be able to take like crazy bumps in a match. Even though he did take one at that pay-per-view where he showed up with Sting at WrestleMania there.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But that wasn't like him in a match. I mean, that was just, um, yeah, I don't know. I think he's obviously still one of the biggest stars in the history of the sport, maybe top two with Stone Cold, and people love to see him. But I don't think people want to see him wrestle anymore. I think they'd like to see him come out to his music, get everybody fired up, do the listening ear thing, and point to the crowd, and then like kind of like being MC, and then but I mean I can't imagine the Hulkamaniac who is desperate to see one more match.
Well, it's possible. You could see another Hogan match. It would be awful, but um,
Yeah, there's footage on YouTube of Ox Baker's last match, and it's like grim. I mean, it's just awful, and that was exactly what I imagine a Hulk Hogan match would be in 2016. Just like this old guy, kind of like walking really slowly.
you know,
And
there's a thing with that in that it would definitely be a horrible match, but um, Terry Funk is like 190, and
oh no, that's true. He's a freak of nature.
and he'll still come out and wrestle like a really good match. Um, it's it's really weird because like I mean we saw Terry Funk in WCW. I mean not WCW, ECW.
Yep.
And I mean I don't know how old he was at that time. And this is like 20 years ago. But he must have been 60. I don't even know. But he was still good. And like the thing with him is that like, he's retired, but he'll like come out of retirement if people are just like, "Yeah, we just want you to do a match." He'll be like, "Okay, I guess I'm not retired anymore."
Yeah, I
But
mean, he's one of a kind though. There's not many people who can do that.
yeah, I mean, he's like the kind of dude who like started doing moonsaults in his 50s. Like,
Yeah, yeah, just because he wanted to see if he could do it. Um, yeah, I'd see it. I'd watch a Terry Funk match, but not Terry Funk Hulk Hogan. That would be too much.
yeah, that would be maybe too much.
Um, all right, that's all we have for news this week. And now we're going to do a semi-regular feature we've done before. This is called Underrated, Overrated. This is where we talk about something that's underrated in pro wrestling and something that's overrated in pro wrestling. It's self-explanatory.
All right, so this underrated overrated is my choice since the last one was Tom's, and today I'm gonna put forth the that wrestling managers are underrated and wrestling valets are overrated.
Controversial. Explain your choices.
Okay. Um, and what I mean here is that like a wrestling manager is somebody who comes out and you have your a good example of this was on Raw where you have Brock Lesnar with Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman comes out and does what a wrestling manager should do. He talks for Brock Lesnar who can't talk. He gets the crowd riled up, gets the crowd invested in what's happening, and kind of works the match. I mean, he does the match, sets everything up, and it does it in a way that's believable. And you have people like in the past with their, wrestling stables. You had the Dungeon of Doom, and you had whatever Jimmy Hart was doing, and the Heenan family, and you had Harvey Whippleman and Fuji and all those other guys, and the wrestling manager used to be a big thing. You'd have Jim Cornette come out and get the crowd all riled up, and that kind of thing is really missing from wrestling now. I mean, who is a manager that you can name besides Paul Heyman? I mean, maybe Truth Martini.
Right, and Zeb Coulter, who was vanished from TV.
Yeah, that's the thing. The wrestling manager was a thing that was pretty prominent in the past for a good reason too. It wasn't like they were just there for nothing. I mean, they were there to do things, to get the story going and get make things work. But on the other hand, we have the wrestling valet. Now the valet is, you can't mistake for a wrestler. I mean, a manager, because the valet doesn't come out and do the talking. The valet just comes out and is kind of like arm candy. It's the kind of like person who comes out and is just, an excuse to have a pretty woman near the ring. And, it wasn't incredibly ineffective in the past. I mean, you did have your kind of your Miss Elizabeth and your sensational Sherry and your woman, but those besides those, like currently, usually when there's a valet, it's always just like an excuse to have someone who is dressed sexily be like manhandled at some point. It's not exactly like the greatest use of storytelling that it could be, and it was in the past. I mean, there were some really good angles with like Miss Elizabeth, for example. Um, but currently, wrestling valets tend to be just there for the sake of being because they're women and they look good. So
I'm
that's
gonna I'm
you.
gonna slightly disagree on valets. I totally agree on managers. I think they're underrated even by fans. Who I mean, like you never hear people talking about. I mean, you do like some super nerds talking about their favorite managers of all time, but people don't like have this attachment to the great managers that the way they do to the great wrestlers. And that I mean, the managers in the past played such an important role, and in some ways were better performers than the wrestlers. I mean, if you look at all the guys that Captain Lou Albano managed, I mean, some of them were good, but none of them would have been half as interesting without Captain Lou.
It's true. Um, any pretty much like any imagine like in the WWF when Bobby Heenan was there, pretty much everybody that Bobby Heenan managed would have been like completely useless, except for Andre. But like he managed people like Meng and stuff. Like it's not like Meng wasn't. I mean Haku, depending on whatever promotion you're in.
That's right. Or
Um,
Tonga Kid, if you really want to go way back.
yeah, but the thing with someone like Haku wasn't gonna be able to get on the mic and talk, and you could easily put him in with Bobby Heenan, who could hype him up as a monster, and that's what they did with him, and that's why people remember Haku. No one would remember Haku if he didn't have Bobby Heenan with him.
Right, and even guys who could talk, like think about the Four Horsemen. Um, Three of those guys, actually four if you count Oli, I guess, depending on which version of the Horseman you're dealing with. But like Flair, Tully, and Arn were all good on the mic. Flair obviously is one of the best of all time on the mic, but J.J. Dillon still added like an extra dimension to them because like here were these guys who were just like these arrogant jerks, and then they have this like business manager who's even more arrogant, except he doesn't actually get in the ring to back it up, which is the most frustrating thing at all. He's like this guy who basically has these dudes who will go out and kick everyone's ass, and then he just sits back and counts the money. I mean, and that added a lot to the Four Horsemen that they had. Like, I contend J.J. Dillon was the real fourth horseman with Flair, Arn, and Tully,
I
and then it was just like a rotating extra spot.
I would agree. I like J.J. Dillon in the Four Horsemen. The kind of manager situation is sadly lacking these days, and it's the kind of thing that they really should bring back. I mean, there's no reason for them not to.
No, it's just it's weird, and it's not necessarily just a WWE thing because, as you point out, there's not a lot of managers anywhere else. It's not like there's a ton in. I think ROH it's just Truth Martin and kind of Maria, who's sort of more a valet. But um, is there any manager in TNA? I'm blanking on it.
Man, I don't think so, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I mean, if there is, it's not someone who's particularly prominent or at the top of the promotion. Um, and so everyone seems to have left the manager thing, even though I think it's a really popular feature of wrestling. Now, the valet thing, I will slightly disagree because I think the distinction between a valet and a manager is often just based on the gender of the person. I think the best valets were also just managers who happen to be women, like Sensational Sherry and Sunny and even kind of Miss Elizabeth, although she didn't do nearly as much as Sherry and Sunny did. Um, but I think when you have someone like a Sensational Sherry I mean, Sunny was the best thing about whatever team she was managing or valeting for, right? Think about that, like the Body Donnas or like the whatever redneck team, the Godwins, and like just these guys who never would have got anywhere, but they had this like really good performer, this woman who was attractive but also was great on the microphone, basically to come out and get all this heat to the point where she would got more heat than the team.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, okay.
but I agree that now, especially the valet. Think about like Fandango. It's literally just like a woman to walk out to the ring with him and then do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Like even they had Adam Rose on Raw.
Right. Yeah, he came out with Rosa.
Yeah, I mean, what does she do? She is
Yeah.
literally there just to look good. It's like
Yep.
that. I think like, I mean, what you're saying about, I mean, about Sherry and Sunny is true. I mean, but they're essentially managers.
Right.
They're doing the same thing. Whereas like valet, in the sense that I'm talking about, it is someone like Rosa or like with I don't even know the name of the lady that comes out with Fandango. I don't even know her name. That's
It doesn't matter. Um, yeah, and I think Maria in Ring of Honor is sort of a throwback to like the Sherry, where because she interferes in matches and like she gets into it with the crowd and she draws heat to the kingdom. And I think that's a good way to do it. But like, it's pointless just to have a woman come out just to like walk out wearing a skimpy dress or something. I mean, you're not adding anything to it.
yeah, I think, but that's kind of the way the manager has gone. It's gone from manager to kind of valet that does nothing.
Yeah. And ironically, the first valet was a man. He was the guy who would accompany Gorgeous George to the ring, and he wasn't a manager. But he had a great gimmick, which was he'd come out with the giant atomizer and like spray the ring with perfume, and then spray the opponent with perfume and stuff, and like he'd like take George's robe and everything. Like, and he drew all this heat because people were just like outraged that this wrestler had his own butler essentially. That's a way to get like great heat and not be a manager. Just have someone come out and do like this really annoying shtick that the crowd hates. Um, but it doesn't seem like there's any interest in building managers or in making valets anything more than arm candy, except with the exception of NXT, where Carmella accompanying Enzo and Big Cass is sort of a kind of a valet slash wrestler in the Sherry mold, and doing a pretty good job. I honestly think that Enzo would frankly be a better manager than he would be as a wrestler. He's great on the microphone. He's okay in the ring. And he'd be the kind of guy who could come in, you put him with a bunch of guys who can't talk, and he can get instant heat for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I mean he's an alright wrestler though.
Yeah, he's not bad, and he could take bumps, which you have to do as a manager when when the good guy finally catches up with you. But you put him with like Baron Corbin or something like that, who's never going to be a star on his own without someone to talk for him. And you'll get people who want to see this guy get his ass kicked just because he has this annoying sidekick who's always talking about how great he is. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, I mean that's a good example of someone who could use a manager.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I look at some of the people at NXT, and they've got a mixed track record in terms of making them stars on the main roster, and you can just kind of look at people and say it's just not going to work, no matter how much they push this person, because they're missing like one key ingredient. Corbin's okay in the ring, but he'd be a lot better if he had someone to talk for him because he can't do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they just don't have people around like Bobby Heenan or something to do it. I mean, I'm sure there are people, but you'd have to go back and pull some old wrestlers.
Right. Which they effectively did for Zeb Coulter, right? They got Dutch Mantel to do it.
Yeah, I mean, which essentially they did for everybody in the '80s when they had almost every Mr. Fuji was a wrestler. Bobby
Yeah,
Heenan was a
Freddie
wrestler.
Plasky.
Yeah,
Yeah, basically everybody except Cornette, right?
yeah. Well, probably not Harvey Whippleman.
Oh no, that's true. Yeah, that's right. And Frenchie Martin, I think he was not a wrestler.
And I assume Jimmy Hart is not.
No, no, he was a God, he was like in some '60s group that had a big hit.
Really?
Yeah, that's the thing though. Like in those days, you sort of went in. There were people who just wanted to be managers, and they probably started out as referees or something, and then got into managing. But I mean, who would do that now?
I would do that.
I would do that too. It's the only thing I could do in wrestling, really. Um, all right. Well, so if you disagree with our take that wrestling managers are underrated and wrestling valets are overrated, feel free to um, shout your anger at us online. And speaking of anger,
Oh,
we're going to move on to our sizzling hot take. This is something I want to talk about this week, and there was a timely post on Cage Side Seats, which made it better, but also some timely tweets from JBL. I want to talk about racism in wrestling, which is everyone's favorite topic.
everyone's
And,
favorite topic. Everyone ever. Everyone
and
loves
I
to
know
talk about
that
racism.
I know that people hear this kind of thing and think, "Oh, why do we have to talk about something. Why can't it just be escapist entertainment, right? Honestly, I'm not really interested in escapism. I kind of I like thinking about the stuff I watch, whether it's wrestling or movies or anything else, in the context of broader social currents, right? To me,
Yeah,
that adds
that
enjoyment.
that makes sense. I tend to do the same thing. I tend to look at things in a more critical, way than just it's escapism. I think that's a lazy way of looking at things.
Yes, I agree. So the racism thing is interesting. It came up earlier this year. There was an article in the Atlantic Monthly, which does not normally write about. No, it was the New Republic. I apologize. There's an article in New Republic about racism in the WWE. New Republic does not traditionally write about professional wrestling. The argument was that the WWE is sort of inherently racist, and the big example they use, I think this was a mistake. The big example they used is they said there had never been a black world heavyweight champion in WWE, and that like you have to make all these weird arguments if that's going to be your case. Like, I mean, The Rock is the obvious one, and the
Yeah.
article said, well, he's Samoan, not, which I think is just stupid. Um,
Well, his dad is black. I mean,
right.
if you're gonna say like The Rock is Samoan, so he doesn't count, then okay, like Obama doesn't count as a black president. It's like
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
stupid. It's a bad argument.
I think that was a bad way to make the case, but they did argue. I think you can easily make a case that WWE has had a history of sort of uncomfortable racist um, characters, gimmicks, backstage stuff. This came up again more recently when Jessica Havoc, who's a wrestler in the indie circuit and also in TNA, she's kind of like the women's version of the monster heel. She was having tryouts at NXT and was apparently impressing them. And then somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody unearthed some tweets she had written years ago that had racial slurs, and that apparently kind of sunk her with NXT, which I thought was sort of weird given the WWE's history of like real insensitivity on these issues. Um, and then just last week, because of what's happening in South Carolina, uh, of all people, of all people, JBL uh, had a series of really interesting tweets where he basically he said it was absurd to continue to fly the Confederate flag, which is still being done in the state capital of South Carolina, although perhaps not for much longer. One of the things he said was Confederate states lasted 4 years, lost a war, forced to free slaves, and joined back rest of country. That is a pathetic heritage and flag. Some people started chirping at him about it. When one guy said, I'm not ready to give up my First Amendment right in order to take someone else's away, are you? And JBL had a response that I absolutely loved, which was, no, racists are free to fly the flag, but I don't think a state government should. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
I want to say like on this point, like it's not a huge deal for me because I don't live in the U.S. It's not a thing, but there are people online. I've seen it all over the place. I've seen it on Facebook, seen it everywhere, where there's like both sides of this issue, where people are just like, this is racist, take it down, and then there's other people who are like, this is a symbol of my Southern heritage or whatever. And I think like, I've never lived in the South. I don't know what the flag means to people in the South. I've never been there, but I'm from Connecticut, and if anybody ever had a Confederate flag, they always meant it to be racist. There was never a point where it was like, people wearing a Confederate flag T-shirt wasn't somebody who was, a racist. It was the kind of thing where it just has that connotation. Maybe it doesn't in the South. I don't know, but it, probably everywhere outside of the South, I would imagine it does. So, I can kind of, I mean, I understand why people would want it taken down. I don't really understand why people care that it's that it has to be flown on the state property. Like, I mean, I understand why you wouldn't want it, but I couldn't understand why people would want it because I don't really know what it means for the South, but I think like for me personally, I do only recognize it as a kind of a symbol of racism. So it's the kind of thing where I was actually more surprised that it was actually flying on a state property, not so much that people wanted to take it down.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, the interesting thing was that JBL of all people was sort of addressing this, like showing this, and I think part of it's because like he's independently wealthy. I mean, he's has been tremendously successful in investing. He doesn't need the WWE, so he can say what he wants. But that kind of all played into all this sort of these different things that have come up with wrestling and race. There was an article in Cage Side Seats today by Salvatore Cusmano. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that name incorrectly. Arguing that sort of racism has been uh, rampant throughout the entire wrestling business, not just in WWE. And he used Jay Lethal winning the Ring of Honor World Heavyweight title as his stepping off point, arguing that Lethal is only the 10th African American to win a World Heavyweight Championship in the basically the modern history of wrestling. Um, I don't know that that's true. I mean, title histories are so bizarre. Yeah, I'm sure people can. And in fact, in the comments, somebody pointed out that Prince Puma is African American, despite his character not being. And he's the Lucha Underground champ. I don't know if that's a world. It's pointless because like heavyweight championships are sort of storyline props. But the broader argument is that there have not been a lot of black champions, even though professional wrestling is really popular among black people. If you go to any wrestling show in the United States, you're going to see a lot of black people. And in fact, audience demographic research shows that the WWE has one of the largest black audiences for any televised sport or sport entertainment. The only sports that have a higher percentage of African Americans in the audience are NBA basketball and boxing. So that's really interesting to me because you have this entire demographic that is not really being well served by the major player in the industry and even by many of the minor players. I think in the indies there are a lot of black wrestlers who are do much better and are treated much better. But you can just go. I mean, like, you can look at the WWE recent history, and it's just this catalog of insensitivity. I mean, think of. I mean, this is Crime Time. If you just go to YouTube and look at their Titantron entrance video, it's these guys. It's like this racist fantasy about they're like robbing white guys in the suburbs, and they're like rapping, and they've got gold teeth. I mean, it's every racist stereotype you could think of, and that's hardly an isolated example. I mean, the farther back you go, the worse and worse it gets.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, I wouldn't even say it's just I mean just black people. I mean it's a you know there's Tatanka.
oh yeah, oh my God, the Native American
Yeah, well, I
uh,
mean Chief Jay Strongbow.
Chiche Strongbow, who was an Italian American from Philadelphia, named Jay Scarpa or Joe Scarpa. I was actually at this indie show I went to on Saturday. There was a guy, who's a wrestler whose character name is Tomahawk, and it was like watching, an Indian gimmick stereotype from like 1962. I mean, he had the war bonnet, he had the face paint, he had a tomahawk, and he ran around the ring doing a quote unquote war dance while the audience chanted "Chop, chop." I mean, it was,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, it was. I
Um
mean, I get that wrestling sort of trades in stereotypes, right? There's not just racial stereotypes or ethnic stereotypes, but it's kind of the stereotypes of like the cowardly bad guy, or the good guy who won't break the rules, or like occupation. Whenever there's like a guy with a military gimmick, he's always this upstanding um, paragon of virtue. I get that it's about archetypes, it's about characters, but at the same time, our society has moved on in a lot of ways, and not in all ways, but it's weird to me. One of the things I think that's a stumbling block for people who are new to wrestling, this was certainly a stumbling block for friends I took to this show, is that you get there and you're confronted with these unreconstructed stereotypes that are decades, in some cases more than decades old. And like, is it time? I think it is time. I guess the question is, why is this stuff still happening? Why is it still catching on? I think it's better at the top level, the WWE, but at the same time, you have like they're not doing anything with their wrestlers who happen not to be white.
yeah, I mean I would tend to agree with that. I think I'm not it's not that like I don't want to put myself in the category of like whiny person who needs everything to be set up as like non-offensive, so I'm not offended. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Right,
need
right.
wrestling to be like a hug box for me. Um,
No, I agree.
but at the same time, like that kind of thing is like I don't mind things that are offensive, but there's some things that are offensive in a way that's not clever. If you if you know what I mean, like it's having like a ridiculously out of date Native American stereotype or something is like something that wouldn't be accepted anywhere.
Right.
Not wrestling, not just wrestling. You know, like if you know if you came out and you were like had a black wrestler come out and his gimmick was that he like carried a bucket of chicken and fried watermelon and like watermelon with him, like nobody would accept that anywhere.
No.
And I think like you wouldn't expect that kind of thing like the you know if you were outside of a wrestling match if you were like this guy like that Indian like the whatever the Native American gimmick like there's nowhere else in the general populace that anybody would think that wasn't racist so
Right.
like that kind of thing I think is like not really acceptable. I mean I don't it's not acceptable in a way because it's not acceptable anywhere and I think wrestling shouldn't get a special pass like because it's you know because it's entertainment or whatever. I mean, TV is entertainment, but you don't have see characters like that. It's the kind of thing where you know you just don't need that kind of thing. It's like you said, society has progressed beyond this kind of thing in general, like not just in wrestling, but everywhere. So it's the kind of thing where you know wrestling should also, if it wants to survive, should also progress past that.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder. I mean, I agree with everything you said, and I think you can still find pockets of that in WWE. I mean, look at Los Matadores. Um, those guys are Puerto Rican, and their gimmick is that they're Mexican matadors. Like, because that's whoever came up with that was like that's the only thing I can think of for Latino people is that they go to bullfights, even though there are no bullfights in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Um,
Are there bullfights in Mexico?
there are bullfights in Mexico.
I'd always
Uh,
imagined that was a Spanish thing.
Mostly a Spanish thing, but also popular in Mexico. Not as popular as it used to be, thankfully. Um, but and I think you can find sort of the kind of I mean, the New Day was like borderline. The original gimmick was like they were like happy black guys who went to church. Like that wasn't explicit, but like there was a gospel choir in their introduction video, and like they're clapping and they're smiling, and like it kind of trades on stereotypes, quote unquote positive stereotypes, but stereotypes of African Americans where they're sort of denied the complexity of white characters. I mean, think about Kevin Owens, right? Is a good example. He's not like a French Canadian stereotype guy, right? He has his own character. He's a complex individual who comes out and says, "I'm doing this for my family. I'm just here doing a job. I'm doing the best for my kids." But then, like, he's this bully and he's this cheat and he's this kind of really violent guy that sort of makes you question like how much of this is real and how much is he lying. I mean, it's a really good, well developed character. And you can say that for, I mean, not every character in the WWE is as well fleshed out as Kevin Owens, but a lot of them, they're not reducible to a set of ethnic characteristics the way that so many wrestlers are if they're not white, right? Like every Samoan wrestler, just about, except for The Rock and Roman Reigns, their gimmick is that they're Samoans, right? And like the Usos have kind of an addition that they're Samoans who like hip hop, basically because their dad was Rikishi and they're allowed to do that. But again, their gimmick is that they're Samoan. I mean, the fact that Uso is like Us is what Samoan wrestlers call each other. Like it's this weird reduction of people to their most obvious characteristics that I think is the problem. And I don't think it's something that you have to march and burn down Titan Tower to complain about. But I think it's one of those things that makes wrestling look like a more low rent product than it really is.
I definitely agree with that. I think one of the ways to get beyond the kind of low rent image is to kind of get rid of this kind of thing. Give people, I mean, it's not really a thing where you have to worry about, am I? You don't have to be hypersensitive to make it work either. I'm not saying like be crazy sensitive about like, people on Tumblr worrying if you're like cisgendered or you're like a rabbitkin or something, and you have to represent that in WWE. What I'm saying is like you have to make characters evenly represented in a way that there's at least a chance that these characters are not one dimensional. And I think WWE, Amy, is the biggest one, and they don't really do a good job of like giving characters more dimensions beyond like happy gospel choir or whatever. It's not you know, I think, and it's not just me saying this kind of thing. The wrestlers have said this kind of thing. Shelton Benjamin actually said, like, when he was in WWE, he felt like there was a ceiling for him. Like he couldn't go any higher than he was. And I think, it's not that he's a bad wrestler because he's a really good wrestler. And he's been doing great in the Bullet Club, and he's all over the place in Japan. And I think he is a good wrestler, and I think he has a point because he couldn't really get over the way that like maybe he could have in other places because he wasn't given like the opportunity. And I think a lot of the like we had mentioned with the primetime players before, they don't really have a character.
Right.
They're just like what is their characters? They're fun loving black guys.
Right.
I mean, they just come out and do their dance, and that's kind of it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't, whereas like if even like someone who's not really like high on the card, Brock, Dolph Ziggler, who we mentioned earlier, he has more of a character than those guys, and those guys are
Yep.
champions.
Yep.
It's the kind of thing where they those guys are so one dimensional at this point that there's no reason to like them.
No, I mean, I agree, and even when a character has like an ethnic, like so you base somebody on an ethnic character that's over, it has a shelf life, a limited shelf life. Rusev is a good example, right? Rusev was basically booked in a 1980s way as the Russian monster, and now that his feud is over, he's over. Like you can't even. I'm not saying that it's racist to book Rusev as Russian, even though he's Bulgarian. Um, but I'm saying that it's bad business sense. There's only so much you can do with that because people don't take those one-dimensional characters seriously. And in some cases, they take them seriously long enough for them to be dispatched as a villain. But in the worst case scenario, they don't take them seriously and they're offended by them. I mean,
Yeah, that's
if you sit down and watch wrestling with people who haven't seen it before, and then like R-Truth comes out rapping, and then you try to explain, oh, he was the NWA heavyweight champion. Like people are like, oh, I don't. I mean, he's a black guy who's rapping. Like that's in like Vince's mind or whoever's mind in creative. That's all black people do is they rap or they maybe like gospel music or they smile, they clap, whatever it is, it's music related. Like there's nothing else to them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems that not even just WWE, pretty much pretty much everywhere. Um, I would even say that like TNA has people like Lashley, and like
Yep.
Lashley isn't. I mean, he's not like a stereotype. He's just a bad character. So
Right.
like the thing, like what I'm saying with earlier is that like he's not a stereotype. He's just really one dimensional. I don't know what his character is supposed to be beyond like he reminds me of a gym trainer. It's the kind
Yeah.
of thing where like he has no depth. And I mean, in his case, I don't actually know if it's because like they're booking him poorly or if he's just lacks charisma. But there are definite. I mean, our truth is a really good example of like just horrible ball dropping. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because he's a really good wrestler,
He is.
and now he's like low card, like, and he's essentially a joke character. He comes out every week with like some goofy thing. He's like just a joke, and it's really sad because like he is somebody who really could have been big. I think like they could have gotten him way over if they let him do stuff besides be a joke character.
I agree. If he had been like Ron Killings, the guy who won the NWA championship, they would have made a lot of money with him. I don't. That's the thing. It shoots them in the foot by sort of only seeing people in these really reductive terms. And a great example of how to do it the right way was just last week in Ring of Honor. Jay Lethal is African American, but that's not his character. He's just a complex individual character. And they could have easily made that rivalry with Jay Briscoe a race thing because I mean Jay Briscoe owns more articles of clothing with Confederate flags on them than I own articles of clothing. Um,
It's true.
but they didn't go that route. That would have been the simple route to do. Instead, it was this complex thing about this sort of insecure champion who's actually kind of shaken by the other guy's insistence that he's the real champion, and the other guy is kind of this megalomaniac. And it was a great story that had nothing to do with race, even though one character was white and one was black. And that's a great way, an illustration of how to do it. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in the WWE, with the exception of stuff The Rock has been involved in.
Yeah, that's the thing. That the Jay Lethal thing with Jay Briscoe is really good because both of those both of those guys are characters. They have their own kind of, flair to them. Whereas, it works. They work. You don't think of I don't think of Jay Lethal as another black character, another black wrestler. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you think of him as Jay Lethal, the kind of crazy, um, power hungry guy, and
Yeah.
like he has a character. You think of Jay Lethal as a character. You don't think of him as like, clapping black guy number two.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean I don't have like a resolution. I just think that people who complain about racism in wrestling, I think sometimes overstate it. People outside who aren't fans, I think, assume it's much more racist than it is. But at the same time, there is this reliance on racial and ethnic stereotypes at all levels of wrestling. I think it just really needs to go because I don't think it's socially regressive. But if you don't care about the politics of it, it doesn't make money. I mean, there's no one who's running out to buy primetime players T-shirts.
Yeah, that's the thing. If they gave those guys more character, and it's not that they probably, I'm sure they have character as people, you know, and they actually on Raw, they tried to show a little of that, but on the show with like the, best professional dad or whatever award that they showed for Titus O'Neil,
Yeah,
but it's a little bit of character building, I guess, but it's not in ring character building. It's not anything that's good. Like you said, it's not going to make people run out and buy a T-shirt. Um, it's the kind of thing where people really, I don't know. There are a lot of those guys. There are a lot of, and it's not even like there's no black guys on in WWE or no like minorities at all. Because there are a lot. It's just, a lot of them are stuck in these terrible gimmicks that aren't going to work for them because they're so one-dimensional and so, you know, I stereotypical, to their race, I guess.
yeah. Um, all right, that's our sizzling hot take on racism. Feel free to disagree with us if you're racist.
Yeah, no,
Um,
feel free to disagree. I don't. I'm happy to hear anybody who has like a different viewpoint on this because I'm willing to have my mind changed on things. If you want to tell me that the primetime players have a really good character for this reason, I'm willing to listen to that argument. But if your argument is that like uh, black people are genetically inferior and Jews are running the media to tell us that we should be more accepting of homosexuals or whatever, I don't want to hear that
yeah,
because
I'll be
that's wrong.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, if you, I mean, I don't know. If you think that Jay Lethal is being misused in Ring of Honor, please let us know. I mean, I'm happy to listen to that argument. I disagree, but I would be curious to hear your point. Um, so that brings us to official rankings. Once in a while, as the two-man tribunal atop the wrestling world, Joe and I will issue official rankings of some categories. It could be anything that we decide needs to be ranked. And this week, fittingly, we're going to rank wrestlers who are nicknamed the Nature Boy. Of course, this week The Nature Boy Buddy Landel died at the age of 53 after a car accident, which was a terrible tragedy. He remembered very fondly by wrestling fans from the 1980s and early 1990s. And when I first became aware of Buddy Landel, I was actually kind of annoyed with him because I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world that he was stealing Ric Flair's. I mean, he really completely took Ric Flair's gimmick. But as I got older, I learned to appreciate how genius that was. Also, because Ric Flair did the same thing to the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. Uh, so, without further ado, let's get down to the official rankings. You prepared these rankings. I agree with these rankings. So, what are they?
All right, so here the top five. We've got the Nature Boy Paul Lee. Um, he's still wrestling, right?
I think
Um,
so.
he was given the official Nature Boy title by Ric Flair. Um, Not that Ric Flair is the originator or anything, but yeah,
Yeah.
he would be lowest on the list, just for lack of fame and probably lack of charisma that all these other guys have. Next, number four out of the Nature Boy wrestlers, we have the Black Nature Boy, Scoot Andrews. What's your take on Scoot Andrews, Tom?
I think now a lot of people might not know Scoot Andrews, but all you need to know is his gimmick is that he's the Black Nature Boy. That's genius. I mean, I don't know why I like that so much, but I do, and it kind of goes in with what we were just saying. It's someone who's it's sort of like tweaking the stereotypes of wrestling by saying, okay, if you just see black wrestlers as black wrestlers, I'm going to be the Black Nature Boy. I think I love it because it reminds me of the novel Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut, where there's a minor character who's a fascist and he's a black character, and he goes by the title the Black Führer of Harlem. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so I think of that when I think of, and also Scoot Andrews, who's been in the Indies for a long time. Good in the mic, good in the ring, solid all around competitor, and with the genius gimmick to go as the Black Nature Boy. If anyone out there wants to be like the Mexican Nature Boy or the Samoan Nature Boy, run with that ball.
I hope there is a Mexican Nature Boy. It's just in Spanish, so I didn't know.
That could be. I mean, that very well could be.
Next, we've got the recently deceased Buddy Landel.
Yes, and so I mean, you watched Buddy Landel in WCW, right? I mean, those are most of my memories of him. But he had a long career, like in Mid South before then, and he was sort of well known. He was also in WWF for a while too, but I think most of my memories of him are in WCW, including matches he had against Flair, amusingly.
Yeah, they had the Battle of the Nature Boys, which was
Yeah,
yeah, that's the greatest thing ever.
and I think he was also, I believe he was champion in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for a while. He was really good friends with Jim Cornette, um, and tremendously well respected in the business. And if you watch like early Buddy Landel, he had black hair and he was just kind of a standard issue babyface with some like really good sort of scientific mat wrestling. And to like become the Nature Boy Buddy Landel really kind of in a way made his career. Um, and it's sort of a cheeky appropriation of a better known character. Um, but sometimes you just have to do what works to get noticed in wrestling because you don't want to be like the featureless babyface. Now this doesn't always work. Terry Taylor was the featureless babyface, incredibly talented in-ring competitor, not a lot of charisma. Vince McMahon decided to make him the Red Rooster, basically ending his career. So it doesn't always work,
True.
but you got to try. You got to risk. And I think Buddy Landel was a worthy bearer of the Nature Boy mantle. Um, and number two, you've had what some people might consider a controversial selection. You actually have the original Nature Boy,
The
Buddy
original
Rogers.
Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, and I think I okay put Buddy Rogers at number two because even though he's the original Nature Boy, he is not the most like spectacular Nature Boy in the sense that our obvious number one is. Um, he's a great wrestler. He was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Um, he's like he's the kind of like legend like a Lou Thez is.
Yeah, Yeah, and he's interesting because he's the guy when Capital Wrestling, which was Vincent K. McMahon's promotion, they ran the Northeastern United States for the NWA. When they broke away from the NWA, they put their title on Buddy Rogers. So he was the first champion in the WWWF, which is now the WWE, because there was some dispute over with the NWA over who was going to be the champion. It was Lou Thesz actually, what the NWA wanted. So he plays a kind of an outsized role in wrestling history. Although not a lot of people know this, but the WWWF would eventually rejoin the NWA before breaking away again. However, Buddy Rogers really took a lot from Gorgeous George. The bleach blonde hair, the sort of sneering, heel gimmick. People wanted to pay money to see Buddy Rogers get his ass kicked, which is all you can ask of a heel. He was, I think, in some ways, more of a pure wrestler than Gorgeous George. And interestingly, I didn't know this until I watched the Stone Cold interview with Triple H. Triple H's favorite wrestler is the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
Wow, I didn't know that either. Um, he apparently also wrestled Buddy Landell in a battle of the Nature Boys.
God, if there could have been a three-way battle of the Nature Boys,
That would be amazing.
um, and I think the reason, because when Ric Flair started, similar to Buddy Landell, Ric Flair was not the Nature Boy. I think did he beat Buddy Rogers like a coming out of retirement Buddy Rogers and then like call himself the Nature Boy?
Who, Landell or
Yeah, here we go. Here we go. So he came out of retirement. The Nature Boy Buddy Rogers came out of retirement, worked in Jim Crockett Promotions, and was beaten by Ric Flair. And after that, that's when Ric Flair started calling himself the Nature Boy because he had beaten Buddy Rogers. So that's pretty interesting. Because
makes
before that, Ric Flair was kind of like sort of a not a generic babyface, but when he started out in the AWA, he certainly was.
Hey, hold on a second. I got someone at my door.
Okay. Okay, so there was a mysterious run-in in Tokyo that the Ring Invader has been repelled, and we're back talking about the Nature Boy. Number one, obviously Ric Flair, even though he was not the first Nature Boy, arguably the greatest professional wrestler of all time, and I think that's a pretty easy argument to make.
I would agree. I think Ric Flair has that kind of once in a generation kind of charisma for a wrestler. Like he was way over. And when I was a kid, I remember seeing him in only wrestling magazines. I'd never seen him on TV, but like even then I was like liking Ric Flair without having seen his matches. Just seeing pictures in wrestling magazines at the time, like wondering who is this guy? He's awesome. There'd always be like a wrestling magazine with his bloodied head on the cover or whatever, and you're just like, wow, you don't see this kind of stuff on TV.
Yeah, and he was the best wrestler in the world basically for the whole of the 1980s, I would argue. And even in the 90s when he was, things were not going as well, he was still tremendous. And even in the 2000s when he had that kind of last career renaissance with Evolution, I think he was great. I mean, hard to argue with that as the top Nature Boy. So those are the official rankings. Wrestlers named Nature Boy. Number 5 is Paul Lee. Number 4 is Scoot Andrews. Number 3, Buddy Landell, the late Buddy Landell. Number 2 is Buddy Rogers, the original. And number 1 is Space Mountain himself, Ric Flair. If you disagree with these official rankings, I'm sorry, they are official and they're binding. If you have any categories you'd like ranked officially, let us know. We're happy to do it. At some point, we're going to do promoters' kids who became wrestlers because I'm fascinated by that, and I think that's a great category.
That's a great category, too. We should do that next time.
But I think that's all we have planned for this week. Before we sign off, is there anything in particular you're looking forward to in the world of wrestling now that the Ring of Honor pay-per-view is over and now that we're just kind of waiting in the interim for SummerSlam?
And right now,
it seems kind of a fallow period right now.
There's a G1 climax in next month, maybe.
TNA has a pay-per-view, the Slammiversary, on the 28th.
Yeah, you said things we're looking forward to, though.
On the night of the 28th, I will not be able to watch the Slammiversary because I'll be in Providence, Rhode Island at Beyond Wrestling. There's like a super stacked card. Paul London is going to be wrestling. I mean, the thing that I'm most excited about is the world's cutest tag team. Candice LeRae and Joey Ryan will be there. The Kingdom will be wrestling. Chris Hero is going to be there. Colt Cabana. It's a packed show. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be fun. So I'll have to miss Slammiversary.
Oh, well, you can catch it on the replay.
I will. I want to tune in for the King of the Mountain match.
Yeah, because it's clear and easily to understand.
Absolutely, it's the simplest wrestling match there is. Um, all right. So yeah, when we come back next week, we'll probably have some follow up. Hopefully, some more news. Hopefully, there'll be more positive things about Raw because honestly, this week was a real D minus of a show.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. There were I don't know. I didn't mind the Seth Rollins groveling segments, but there were way too many of them.
Yeah, like you could just do that once. Also, I mean, I, it's hard for me to say because by all accounts, he's a very nice man outside the ring. I don't think I need to see Kane anymore.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've seen enough Kane for a lifetime.
Yeah, that's a good assessment of Kane.
He's had a stellar career, certainly longer than anyone could have anticipated when he was the Christmas creature.
No, yeah, that's true. He was the Christmas creature. And Isaac Yankem.
Yes, that's right. He was Jerry Lawler's evil dentist. But the fact that he's still like in the mix in main event storylines in 2015 is just it's time to say enough is enough.
I agree.
Um, all right, so that's all for this week. Until next week, I'm Tom.
And I'm Joe, and we've got a bunch of stuff that you always list off that I don't remember.
Yeah, oh, you're right. You're right.
Tumblr and Twitter and
Yeah, so this will be up on our on Joe's YouTube channel, which is X Corn Muffin X. Subscribe because there's also great gaming content. This will also be on our Tumblr, which is closetedanxiety.tumblr.com. There's lots of wrestling content there, including I've been scanning these TNA trading cards that I got at a flea market over the weekend.
Those are great, by the way. I really like those. I really
They're amazing.
spelling errors and all.
Yeah, I mean the copy on the back is so like there's spelling errors, there are things. I mean, just the worst. It's like I don't know how they could have done that. Actually, I do. It's TNA. I don't know why I'm surprised.
Yeah.
But my favorite is the Young Bucks were in TNA for like a cup of coffee, and they were called Generation Me, and it's I mean like looking at this trading card of these two guys, you would never imagine they'd become two of the hottest wrestlers in the world 5 years later.
They're shirtless guys in slacks.
Yeah, they look like the New Kids on the Block or something. They look like 3 Count, actually, I should say, which is probably what Vince Russo was thinking of. Closetedanxiety.tumblr.com, xcornmuffinx on YouTube. If you want to curse me at Twitter over racism or underrated wrestling managers or Dolph Ziggler, please do so. I'm at TJ Breen. Joe, you're also on Twitter, but you don't do anything with it.
Yeah, I check it once a week. So
That,
if you want to tweet at me on Twitter, you're more than welcome to, except like it's this absolute slowest way to get in contact with me.
So don't do that. Comment on the YouTube because Joe responds to all those comments, even if they're intemperate political comments.
I will. I respond to everything on the YouTube, even if it's like you're a jackass, shut up.
All right. So until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll talk again same time next week.
All right. See you guys next week.